Build a real friendship first. Jesus sat down at a table that would have made every religious leader in Jerusalem lose their mind. Luke 5:29 records the scene. Levi, a tax collector who profited off his own people's suffering, threw a massive banquet, and Jesus showed up, not to preach, not to hand out scrolls, to eat, to laugh, to be present. The Pharisees watched from the edges and muttered exactly what you'd expect. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? But notice what Jesus didn't do. He didn't defend the invitation. He didn't explain himself. He stayed at the table. That moment reveals something most believers miss entirely. Jesus didn't build his ministry through sermons alone. He built it through proximity. He spent 3 full years walking, eating, sleeping, and grieving alongside 12 men before he ever gave them the Great Commission. John 15:15 records the shift. He looked at them and said, he no longer called them servants. He called them friends. That word landed like an earthquake. In a culture built on hierarchy, the Son of God demolished the distance between himself and the people he came to save. And this is the part that stings. Matthew 11:19 tells you what the religious establishment called him for it. A glutton, a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. They weaponized his relationships. They turned his dinner invitations into criminal charges. And Jesus never flinched, never pulled back, never traded connection for reputation. He kept showing up at tables that made the religious crowd uncomfortable because he knew something they refused to accept. People don't listen to strangers. They listen to friends. So before you memorize an evangelism script or rehearse a gospel presentation in the mirror, understand this. The most Christ-like thing you can do is sit across from someone and stay. Know their name, know their story. Earn the right to be heard before you ever open your mouth about eternity. The first gospel people will ever read is not the one on your shelf. It is the one you live at their table. Let your actions speak and spark curiosity. In the year 250 AD, a plague ripped through the Roman Empire that killed roughly 5,000 people a day in Rome alone. The plague of Cyprian emptied entire cities. Families abandoned their own sick in the streets. Roman priests fled their temples. Government officials locked their doors. And in the middle of that death zone, one group of people moved toward the dying instead of away from them. Christians. They carried bodies. They nursed strangers. They held the hands of pagans who had mocked them weeks before. They stayed. The Roman world had no framework for what it was watching. These people gained nothing from this. No political power, no tax relief, no social status. They were already despised. Yet they washed open sores and buried the dead with dignity while the empire's finest cowered behind walls. Notice what converted Rome. It was not a theological argument. It was not a scroll. It was a Christ follower kneeling in sewage to help someone who hated them. Matthew 5:16 was playing out in real time. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The Emperor Julian, a man who actively tried to destroy Christianity, wrote a letter years later that tells you everything. He complained bitterly that these Galileans feed not only their own poor, but ours also. He saw it. The empire saw it. Actions preached a sermon that no mouth could have delivered. And the church exploded in growth not because someone won a debate, but because someone showed up with clean water and a burial cloth when no one else would. You will share your faith more loudly in what you do on a Tuesday afternoon than in anything you say on a Sunday morning. When your coworker watches you forgive someone who wronged you, that is a sermon. When your neighbor sees you mow a lawn that is not yours, that is theology with feet on it. People don't argue with kindness. They just quietly start wondering where it comes from. If that stirred something in your spirit, type "stayed" in the comments. Share your personal testimony naturally. The Pharisees had him surrounded. John chapter 9 records the interrogation. A man born blind, healed by Jesus, dragged before the religious authorities to explain himself. They fired questions designed to trap him. They challenged his credibility. They pressured his own parents to disown his testimony. They deployed every institutional tool they had to discredit what had happened. And this man, with zero theological training and zero social standing, gave one of the most devastating lines in all of Scripture. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. That single sentence dismantled the entire Inquisition. Notice what he didn't do. He didn't argue doctrine. He didn't quote scrolls. He didn't try to win a theological debate he was never trained for. He simply told what happened to him. And the Pharisees had no rebuttal. You can argue with a theory. You can debate a doctrine. You cannot cross-examine someone's lived experience. That is the nuclear power of personal testimony. It is the courtroom evidence that no opposing counsel can discredit because the witness is also the exhibit. The Apostle Paul understood this weapon. When he stood before King Agrippa in Acts 26, he didn't open with Romans. He didn't open with prophecy charts. He opened with his story. I used to persecute them. I used to vote for their execution. I used to hunt them across borders. Then the turn. And then I met the one I was hunting. That testimony shook a king. Agrippa's response in Acts 26:28 drips with tension. Paul almost persuaded him with nothing but a before and after story. Revelation 12:11 says they overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Not the word of their seminary degree, not the word of their argument skills, their testimony. Your story is not small talk. It is not filler before the real gospel. It is the gospel with your fingerprints on it, and nobody in your life has the authority to tell you it didn't happen. Invite someone to church or a meal. Nathanael was not interested. John 1:46 catches his reaction the moment Philip told him about Jesus of Nazareth. He scoffed. Mocked the entire idea. Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? This was not polite skepticism. This was cultural dismissal. Nazareth was a footnote of a town. No prophet had come from it. No institution validated it. Nathanael had already made up his mind before the conversation started. And Philip, standing there with every reason to argue or defend, chose 3 words instead. Come and see. That invitation is the most underused evangelism strategy in the history of the church. Philip didn't try to explain messianic prophecy on the sidewalk. He didn't pull out a scroll and start debating fulfillment timelines. He simply said, step into the room and experience it yourself. And Nathanael went. That is the part that wrecks the conventional playbook. The man who mocked the idea walked straight into the encounter because someone he trusted made it easy. No pressure, no guilt, no manipulation, just a door held open. Jesus himself operated on the same frequency. Luke 14:12 records him restructuring the entire social order of dinner invitations. He told his host to stop inviting friends and rich neighbors. Start inviting the poor, the broken, the people who could never repay you. That teaching was not about food. It was about access. Every meal is a mission field. Every church seat is an open invitation to someone who assumed they were not welcome. And most of them are not waiting to be convinced. They are waiting to be invited. The awkwardness most believers feel about evangelism evaporates the moment you stop trying to close the deal and start opening the door. Come and see does not require a degree. It does not require eloquence. It requires one thing: the willingness to say, there is a seat next to me and it has your name on it. If you feel that in your spirit, leave a comment saying, Lord, give me the courage to invite. Use life struggles as a bridge to faith. The Apostle Paul, the most prolific church planter in history, the man who wrote nearly half the New Testament, said something in 2 Corinthians 1:8 that sounds nothing like a victory speech. He said he and his companions were under such pressure, far beyond their ability to endure, that they despaired of life itself. Read that again. Despaired of life itself. This is not a man giving a polished testimony from a stage. This is a man admitting he nearly broke, and he wrote it down in a letter to a church on purpose. That confession became one of the most powerful evangelism tools in Scripture, because 2 verses later in 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, Paul reveals the purpose. God comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others with the same comfort we received. Notice the sequence. He didn't say God removes the trouble. He said God enters it with you. And then you carry that presence into someone else's darkest room. Your pain is not disqualification from ministry. It is your credential for it. This is where faith sharing gets real, not in clean answers and polished phrases. In the raw, honest moments when someone across from you says, I don't know how to keep going, and you can look them in the eye and say, I've been in that exact place, and something held me when I couldn't hold myself. Romans 8:28 is not a bumper sticker. It is a lifeline spoken from the mouth of someone who almost drowned. That kind of honesty cuts through every wall that a religious speech cannot even scratch. Your worst chapter is not something to hide from the people around you. It is the bridge they have been waiting for someone to build. When you connect your suffering to the God who carried you through it, you are not being weak. You are handing someone a map out of the same wilderness. And people do not follow maps drawn by strangers. They follow maps drawn by survivors. Share faith resources casually. A chariot rolled down a desert road in Acts chapter 8 carrying an Ethiopian official who held one of the most powerful government positions on the African continent. He was reading the scroll of Isaiah, out loud, alone. And he could not understand a single word of what he was reading. Philip, directed by the Spirit, ran alongside the chariot and asked one question. Do you understand what you are reading? The man's answer in Acts 8:31 carries more weight than most sermons preached in a year. How can I unless someone guides me? That question has not stopped echoing. 2,000 years later, people around you are holding books they cannot decode, scrolling through Bible apps with no context, listening to podcasts that raise more questions than they answer. They are not hostile to faith. They are lost inside it. And they are waiting not for a preacher, but for a friend who can sit next to them and say, I know a book that wrecked me in the best way. Here, Deuteronomy 6:7 told Israel to talk about God's words when they sat down, walked along the road, lay down, and rose up. That was never a church program. It was a lifestyle of casual, constant relational overflow. Philip did not shout at the chariot from a distance. He climbed in. He sat beside the man. He started exactly where the man already was, in the middle of Isaiah 53, confused and searching. And from that single passage, Philip walked him all the way to Jesus. Not with a curriculum, not with a 4-step plan, with a conversation that started where the other person's curiosity already lived. That is the art of sharing resources. You meet people inside their questions instead of dragging them into yours. A book. Recommendation is not small talk. A podcast link is not filler. A verse you text someone at midnight because it held you together is not trivial. It is Philip running toward the chariot. And the person in that chariot did not need a louder voice. They needed a closer presence. Tell us in the comments which book, verse, or song first opened your eyes to something you had never seen before. Answer honestly when asked about your hope. 1 Peter 3:15 is one of the most quoted verses in evangelism training, but almost nobody talks about the verse right before it. Verse 14 says, "Do not fear their threats, do not be frightened." Peter was not writing to missionaries. He was writing to scattered believers living under Roman suspicion, hauled into informal tribunals, pressured by neighbors, interrogated by local officials. The question, "Why do you have hope?" was not a friendly coffee shop conversation. It was a legal probe. And Peter's instruction was staggering. Do not panic. Just answer. Notice the architecture of that command. Peter did not say, "Prepare a theology lecture." He said, "Be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have." The word reason in the original Greek is apologia. It is a courtroom term, a legal defense. Peter was telling hunted believers to treat every hard question like a witness stand and simply testify, not with aggression, not with volume. The verse finishes with gentleness and respect. This is not a battle cry. It is a controlled, steady, unhurried honesty that disarms the person asking more than any argument ever could. The early church proved this when Polycarp, the 86-year-old bishop of Smyrna, stood before the Roman proconsul in 155 A.D. He was told to curse Christ and walk free. His response was calm, unshakable, and devastating. He said he had served Christ for 86 years and Christ had never wronged him. How could he blaspheme the king who saved him? That was not a prepared evangelism script. That was a man answering, honestly when asked about his hope. And that answer outlived the empire that killed him. Most people around you are not asking trick questions. They are asking real ones. How are you so calm right now? How did you get through that? Why are you not angry? Those questions are not small talk. They are 1 Peter 3:15 moments disguised as Tuesday afternoon conversations. And the answer that shakes someone's world is almost never a verse you memorized. It is the truth you lived through, spoken without flinching. Pray for people when they share hardships. Acts 28:8. Records a moment most people skip right past. Paul was stranded on the island of Malta after a shipwreck. The father of the island's chief official, Publius, lay sick with fever and dysentery. Paul walked in, he prayed, he placed his hands on the man, and the man was healed. But here's what happened next that changes everything. Verse 9 says the rest of the sick on the island came and were healed too. An entire island, transformed. Not because Paul preached a sermon, because he prayed for one sick man in one room. Prayer in the presence of someone who is hurting is the most terrifying and most powerful act most believers will never attempt. Not public prayer, not mealtime blessings. The raw, specific, eyes-open kind of prayer where you look at a coworker who just told you their marriage is falling apart and you say, "Can I pray for you right now?" That question detonates every social norm in the room, and almost every single time the answer is yes, because people in pain do not care about your theology. They care that someone stopped long enough to stand in their fire with them. James 5:16 does not whisper this command. It shouts it. Pray for each other so that you may be healed. Notice it does not say pray for each other in your prayer closet later tonight. The context is face-to-face, confessional, immediate. Elijah is invoked 2 verses later as proof, a man who prayed and the sky obeyed. James is telling ordinary believers that the same pipeline of power is available in their living room, their office hallway, their hospital visit. Every time you pray aloud for someone in their presence, you are opening a window they did not know existed. You do not need permission from a pastor to pray for someone. You do not need a title. You do not need eloquent words. You need 5 seconds of courage and one honest sentence aimed at heaven while someone beside you is breaking. That is not awkward. That is the most Christ-like moment most people will ever witness outside of a church building. If that is something you have experienced or want to experience, type "pray" in the comments. Be vulnerable about your own doubts. The disciple Thomas gets a terrible reputation. John 20:25 records his famous declaration after the other disciples told him Jesus had risen. He refused to believe unless he could see the nail marks and put his finger in the wounds. 2,000 years of sermons have turned him into a cautionary tale, the poster child for weak faith, doubting Thomas. But that framing misses something critical. Thomas was the only disciple honest enough to say what the others were probably thinking, and Jesus did not punish him for it. He showed up specifically for him. John 20:27 captures what happened next. Jesus walked into the room, looked directly at Thomas, and said, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Notice the tenderness buried inside that command. Jesus did not shame him publicly. He did not exclude him from the group. He met the doubt head-on with evidence. He honored the question by answering it. And Thomas responded with the single most powerful declaration of faith in the entire Gospel of John: "My Lord and my God." That sequence is the blueprint for one of the most counterintuitive evangelism methods you will ever use. Sharing your doubts, not your polished testimony, not your greatest spiritual victory. The moments when you wrestled with God and were not sure He was listening. Because every single person you will ever share your faith with has the same unspoken fear. What if this is not real? And when you admit that you have stood in that exact valley and came out the other side, you hand them something a confident sermon never could. Credibility, 2 Corinthians 4:7 says, "We carry this treasure in jars of clay, not jars of steel, not jars of marble." Clay, fragile, cracked, visibly imperfect. And Paul says the reason is so that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Your doubts are not a liability in evangelism. They are the Christ-shaped cracks that let the light through. And the person sitting across from you who is terrified to believe does not need your perfection. They need your honesty. If you feel that in your spirit tonight, leave a comment saying, "Lord, use even my doubts for your glory." Plant a seed and walk away without forcing it. Jesus told a story in Mark 4 that most people think they understand. A farmer went out to scatter seed. Some fell on the path. Birds devoured it. Some fell on rocky ground. It sprang up fast and died faster. Some fell among thorns and was choked. Some fell on good soil and produced a harvest beyond imagination. Sunday school teaches this as a lesson about soil types, but there is a detail buried in this parable that almost nobody preaches. The farmer never inspected the soil before throwing the seed. He scattered it everywhere, and then he walked away. Mark 4:26 through 27 makes this explicit in the very next parable. A man scatters seed on the ground. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. Read that last clause again, though he does not know how. Jesus is describing a farmer who plants, leaves, and trusts a process he cannot see, control, or accelerate. That is the most radical instruction in all of evangelism. Do your part, then take your hands off the outcome, because the harvest was never yours to manufacture. 1 Corinthians 3:6 seals it. Paul said, "I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow." Notice the division of labor. Paul did not plant and water and grow and harvest and package and distribute. He planted, period. Then he moved on. The growth belonged to someone else entirely. And this is where most believers silently carry an impossible weight. They believe that if the person they shared with does not convert immediately, they failed. But the Bible never assigns you the role of converter. It assigns you the role of scatterer. This is the truth that will set every anxious evangelist free. You are not the closer. You are the courier. Your job is to carry the seed, throw it with love, and trust the God who made soil and rain and time to finish what you started. Some of the most powerful spiritual moments of your life will be conversations you never see the ending of. And that is not failure, that is faith. Because the kingdom of God has never depended on your ability to finish the harvest, only on your willingness to open your hand. There is a quiet revolution that does not require a stage, a microphone, or a seminary degree. It happens in kitchens and parking lots and hospital rooms. It happens when someone who carries the presence of God simply refuses to hide it. Not with megaphones, with meals. Not with arguments, with presence. Not with pressure, with patience. Every method you heard in this video traces back to one man who walked through Galilee and changed the world not by shouting louder than everyone else, but by sitting closer. The Great Commission was never an assignment to win arguments. It was an invitation to build tables long enough for everyone. And the most powerful thing you will ever say about Jesus might not be something you say at all. It might be the moment you stay when everyone else leaves and someone finally asks you why. If this changed how you see sharing your faith, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to catch what most people read right past, subscribe. We do this every week. Or leave a comment with a topic you want us to uncover next.